Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Bible Basics with Pastor Steve. Sorry to have been gone unexpectedly for 2 weeks. Good evening, John. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your grace. So last week, I was planning on having class, and I had to cancel at the last minute because my wife got stuck in Leesburg. The car broke down, had to go down and pick her up. That's all taken care of. The week before that, was the week of annual conference, and I thought I could get everything done and do everything, but it became too much, so I canceled that at the last minute too. Except I never sent the email, so you guys never found out that I canceled at the last minute. I just didn't show, and I apologize for that. But I am back this week, and we will be back. We will we will continue to have classes until the next week that I will be off is when I'll be at ASP, July 2nd. So for the rest of June, we will be meeting as scheduled. So Kayleen's here, Stella's here. Good evening to both of you. And tonight we're going to be picking up where we left off with King David. Lesson 29. We're going to be in 2 Samuel again. We're doing all the critical stories of the Bible, one story at a time, 1 week at a time. Stories retold in modern English and modern storytelling. What's the word I want to say? The modern way of telling stories, a modern narrative format. I send those out every Tuesday night. If you want to be on every Tuesday night that we're meeting anyway, if you want to be on that email list, I encourage you, because you'll get that email on Tuesday and then you'll know, oh, wait, we've got class tonight. If you don't get that email on Tuesday, you should get something. Usually you'll get something else instead. But anyway, shoot me an email at the email on your screen if you're not already on the mailing list. And of course, it's always helpful to follow on YouTube and on Facebook. That way, it's easy to find everything. It's good if you like the stuff too. That helps us be more easily found by other potential students. So, with that said, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer, shall we? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, so previously on the Bible, since it's been a few weeks. Good evening, Roseanne. All right, so when last we left, hello, Charles. When last we left off, Absalom had decided to overthrow his father, King David, and he was staging a coup. And there was a war. Absalom lost. David won. Joab and his men found Absalom. Hello, Judy. And Joab disobeyed a direct order from King David. David wanted his son captured alive. They were in a position where they could capture him alive. Joab killed him. And when word got back to David that Absalom had been killed, he was absolutely distraught. And that's where we pick up this week in 2 Samuel chapter 19. Once again, this is not a paraphrasing. I'm not calling it that anymore. I'm retelling the story. So David wept over Absalom's death, and the troops heard about it. When they returned to the city, they snuck in as if they had lost the battle and were ashamed. It should have been a day of victory, but it was more like a day of mourning. Joab was furious, and he confronted David. You've humiliated your men. These men saved your life and the lives of everyone in your family. You're grieving for a man who hated you. These men love you, and you're acting like you hate them. Don't we mean anything to you? Would you be happier if he had lived and we had all died? You get out there and speak to your men, or you won't have anyone left by sundown. It'll be a worse disaster than everything else combined. The king got up and went out and sat at his place in the city gate. Everyone was relieved and came to see him. King David sent word to the elders in Jerusalem via Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. He wanted them to invite him back to Jerusalem to resume his reign. And they did. On the way back to Jerusalem, David passed Gilgal, and once again Shimei came out to see him. This time he was apologetic for the things he had said when David was fleeing Jerusalem. Once again, Abishai wanted to kill him because he had cursed the Lord's anointed. Once again, David said, "What am I going to do with you guys? I'm still king. That's enough. Nobody else needs to die today." When he returned to Jerusalem, Mephibosheth came to see him. He was a mess. He hadn't bathed or changed clothes since David left. David asked, "Why didn't you come with us when we evacuated the family?" He answered, "I tried. I sent for my donkey, but Ziba abandoned me and lied about it. I would never abandon you. My family is all dead, and you're all I have left. You've always treated me like family." David said, "Relax. I'll split the land between the two of you." And Mephibosheth said, "I don't care about the land. You can keep it. I'm just glad you're back." This is the story of our Lord. So to reflect in our reflections, let's start by just doing a little bit of recap because there's some names in here that you may not remember from 3 weeks ago. So first of all, who was Shimei? So you may remember that when Absalom declared himself king and David fled Jerusalem, as Absalom was approaching Jerusalem, he had to pass Gilgal as he fled, and this guy Shimei came out and gave him all kinds of trash talk as he was going by, basically saying that King Saul should have been king, and hello Cindy, Saul should have been king, and Jonathan should have been king, and David was getting what he deserved for stealing the nation away from Saul, and this was, his comeuppance. And at the time, the men with David wanted to kill him for saying these things because they were cursing the Lord's anointed, meaning David, the person that God had anointed to be king. And David said something interesting, which we'll come back to in a little bit. Now, the interesting thing is, so this week, he's going back by Gilgal again on his way back to Jerusalem, and Shimei comes out again. This time he's very apologetic. "I should never have said those terrible things when you came by." And so again, David's guys want to kill him for cursing the Lord's anointed. And David says, "No, nobody else needs to die today." But here's the interesting thing. It sounds as if David is being gracious and letting it go, but he's not. Many years later, when David is on his deathbed and he calls Solomon to his side and he wants Solomon to succeed him on the throne, in his last conversation with Solomon, he gives him basically a list of people. These are the people you need to kill after you become king. These people can't be around when you're king. And some of those names make very good sense. One of them is Shimei. He said, "I told him that I wouldn't kill him that day. That doesn't mean you can't kill him now." Really, David? Wow. That was years ago. Wow. Okay, so didn't really let it go. Now, who is Mephibosheth? So remember way back, Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son, the only one left remaining from Jonathan's, when David became king, Jonathan was the only one left of let me try this one more time. When David became king, Mephibosheth was all that was left of Jonathan's line. And David, Jonathan was David's best friend, and he always promised him, "After I become king, I'll make sure your family is taken care of." And he did. Now, Mephibosheth was crippled. He wasn't born that way. When he was a child, during a crisis moment, his nurse was trying to run away with him. There was an invasion or something, and she tripped and fell. And when she fell on him and broke his feet, and he was never able to walk again after that. So when Absalom attacked Jerusalem, well, he actually didn't have to attack it. He just strode in and took it. When Absalom was approaching, David cleared his family out. Mephibosheth should have gone with them, but he couldn't get on his donkey by himself. He needed his staff, his servants, I should say. They weren't staff, to get him onto his donkey, but they didn't come. His top guy, Ziba, abandoned him. And then Ziba caught up with David and said, "Hey, I tried to get Mephibosheth to come with us, but he said he wanted to stay and put his loyalties behind Absalom. I don't know what to tell you." And so David was upset, and he said, "Okay, well, everything that he owned, I'm giving to you." So now he's back, and Mephibosheth says, "That's not what happened. He left me here. I couldn't get out." And so then David says, "Okay, well, I'll give you back half of your stuff." Now, why would you give him back half instead of everything? I'm thinking probably what David's thinking is, all right, I don't really know what happened. Maybe Mephibosheth's telling the truth. Maybe Ziba's telling the truth. Let's just split the difference and let bygones be bygones. But Mephibosheth says no, and this is how you know this is how you know he's telling the truth. And plus, he's Jonathan's son, and Jonathan was a good guy. And of course, that doesn't seem to mean much in the Bible. Good guys have terrible sons all the time, but I like to think that he's like his father. And he said, "No, I don't need the stuff. I've always eaten at your table. I don't need income. You've always treated me like family. You let him have it all. You're back. You're okay. That's all I care about." I believe him. I think he was a good guy. Interesting thing about this story is a rare example of Joab exerting a positive influence over David. Usually, Joab is causing trouble somewhere. Now, I don't want to misspeak. Joab was a brilliant strategist, okay? He always knew the I don't want to say the right thing to do. He always knew the smart thing to do. He never cared whether or not the smart thing was the right thing to do. All he cared about was the outcomes. Now, of course, I would say that if you do the wrong thing in the short term because it's the smart thing, in the long term, it's going to come back to bite you. And that is the case with at least some of Joab's decisions. Joab did things that were expedient and got things done in the short run, but, well, we'll find out what happens in a later chapter. So, what does this story tell us about God? Well, this is another case where God is not present in the story directly, is not acting in the story directly, but this is interesting. The story reveals something that David believes about God. When David was fleeing the city and Shimei came out the first time and cursed him, his men said, "He's cursing God's anointed, and he should die for that." And David's response is essentially, "I'm not sure I'm still God's anointed. If I was still God's anointed, I'm not sure that Absalom would be doing what he's doing right now. So let's wait and see how this plays out. If Absalom wins and I die, maybe he's God's anointed now, and God has turned his back on me." Now, that was what he said then. Well, then he wins. Okay. So then David's response is essentially, "Oh, I won. That means I am still God's chosen one. That means it was wrong for Shimei to say those things he had said. If I had lost, then he would have been justified. But since I won, he's not justified. And now I'm going to hold it against him." So at least, that's a spoiler. That's from later in the story. But so David's assumption seems to be that if he is God's chosen one, he's going to win, probably always. And if God turns his back on him, he will stop winning. And that is dangerous, because that gives that sort of tells David, look, God is on your side unconditionally. So you can do whatever you want. And in fact, people have said that, even Nathan said something very much like that, to look, the Lord's on your side, do whatever you want. And well, that's not the case. You can't do whatever you want just because God's on your side. God might switch sides if you do the wrong thing. So whenever, and this is still holds true today. People still act this way sometimes. They it's especially dangerous for religious leaders. I think, hey, I'm doing God's work. That means God is in my corner, and whatever I do, the ends justify the means. I've known people in ministry who have thought that way and behaved in that way. It's extremely dangerous. All sorts of harm can be done. So what does this story tell us about ourselves? Well, the three questions we usually ask are, what does the story tell us about God? What does it tell us about ourselves? What does it tell us tell us about our relationship with God and our relationships with each other? So we just talked about God a little bit, but I don't think I can separate out this week what it tells us about ourselves versus our relationships. It's so some people are obsessed with what other people think about them, and other people don't care at all. So in the story today, David's men are you know broken. They're demoralized because David is not treating them right after they won a decisive victory for him. And some people would say, "Oh no, I can't let my men think ill of me. I've got to do whatever I need to do to fix this." And other people would say, "I don't care what the men think. I'm going to do what I think is right, and I'm going to act the way I want to act, and they have to, you know, you know, act like grown-ups and just deal with it." Well, both of those extremes are wrong. And if you know me by now, you probably know that I'm usually going to say both extremes are wrong, and there's things that need to be weighed against each other. Here's why they're both wrong, and this is the Stoic in me coming out. Um, some people's opinions matter a lot, and other people's opinions don't matter at all. And some people are to be trusted in some areas, but not in others. That's probably actually most of us. So our task is to have good judgment in deciding who we're going to listen to and who we're going to ignore, and whose moods we're going to check in on and whose we're not. So if somebody is always upset and depressed and everything that happens is the wrong thing and everything people say to them is the wrong thing, then if they're upset today, then maybe that's not a big deal. But if there are people who are rarely like that, but they are today, and they say it's because of us, that's something to take note of. So in this case, um, David's kingdom is hanging by a thread. I mean, yes, they've won this decisive battle, and Absalom is dead, but there's always another Absalom, and the continuing support of his people is absolutely critical. So what his men think of him in this day matters. If they go to bed thinking, "I just saved the king's life," and the king doesn't care at all, sounds like he actually wishes the war had gone the other way, that is hugely problematic. So wisdom for everybody is knowing who to listen to and who not to, and whose position to value and whose to not. So, and that's about messaging, right? David's not sending out the right message to his people. Messaging matters, I encounter people in ministry, both in lay ministry and and clergy, who really hate the idea that we need to be conscious of what people hear us saying. Um, they think as long as I know what I'm trying to communicate, that's all that matters. If they hear something else in what I say, that's not my problem, it's their problem. Oh, no, that's your problem. That's the task of a communicator, is to say things in a way that people are going to understand them. And that, of course, is the miracle of Pentecost, that God has promised us, that God will give us the ability to say what we need to say on God's behalf in the language that needs to be heard. So yeah, messaging matters. And Joab has gone to David in this story and said, "David, your messaging is way off right now, and you need to correct course before it is too late." And thankfully, David did. All right, so that's it for our lesson tonight. News. There is a little bit of news that I sort of missed. I don't know how I missed this. I guess I know why I missed it, because we didn't have class last week, so I didn't catch up on Methodist news last week. So we've had an event in the Methodist Church. After General Conference met, after our annual conference met, the United Methodist Church of the Ivory Coast in Africa voted to secede from the United Methodist Church. And the last time they told us when they joined the Methodist Church, they had 1 million members. We're not sure how many they have right now, because they haven't turned in their reports since 2016. But for the sake of argument, let's say it's still around 1 million, maybe more. So the situation is in Africa, as I've said before, is complicated. Most Methodist conferences, most United Methodist conferences in Africa have very close ties with United Methodism in the United States, because most conferences in Africa were founded by the United Methodist Church or one of its predecessor organizations, but not all of them. Two different Methodist groups were active in Africa setting up missionary conferences. One was the Methodist Church of, it wasn't the United Methodist Church back then, it was the Methodist Episcopal Church. The other was the British Methodist Church, and they set up a conference in the Congo. They set up the Ivory Coast Conference, and they probably set up others that I'm not aware of because they're not part of us. So the conference that we currently have in the Congo is the result of the merger of the conference that we set up in the Congo with the conference that the British Methodists set up in the Congo. So they are, on paper, merged into a single conference, but the reality is they've never gotten along. And in fact, right now, the last time I checked, and it's hard to follow these things closely. Last I heard, they had 2 people claimed to be bishop and 2 cabinets. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for a fact, but I know that one of the conferences at General Conference submitted 2 sets of delegates. And I would not be surprised if that was not the Congo. But that's not the guys we're talking about right now. We're talking about the Ivory Coast. And the Ivory Coast, the entire conference came to us as a whole. Okay. So, and this happened in 2004. And so this was a conference that had been set up by the British Methodist Church, but had been independent for a period of time, not a long period of time, but years. And they decided they want to be part of the United Methodist Church, which they came to us and said, hey, we want to join. And they threw the paperwork together pretty quickly, and attempted to join in 2004. Thought they had joined in 2004. The Judicial Council said, no, you didn't do that right. So they ended up becoming part of us in 2008. And there was really no preparation work done for this merger. And there was no real intentional follow-up work done after the merger. And although they did participate in some global Methodist projects, in a lot of ways, they never really integrated with the denomination. So it was not too big of a surprise to some people that this happened, especially considering I don't think they sent delegates to General Conference this year. They didn't take any action on any of the constitutional amendments we were trying to make. They haven't submitted any journals since 2016. So there were a lot of reasons why this would not be a huge surprise. So this is a million people who came into the denomination in 2008 and have now left again. And the sad thing is, and it was pointed out in an article I read today that back when the EUB Church merged with the Methodist Church to form the United Methodist Church, that vote was taken in 1968. A lot of legwork was done before that to prepare people for the vote, to prepare people for the merger, to educate everybody on the differences in the culture between the two. And despite the fact that all of that lead work was done, and despite the fact that people tried to follow up with more intentional work, it was not at all a perfect process, and a lot of people had their feelings hurt on the EUB side, thinking that it wasn't really handled as graciously as it could have been. And that was despite the fact that a lot of work went into it. And you know what? That merger was nowhere near as big as this merger that had 1 million people in it. As if you compare the amount of prep work that went into the EUB merger compared with the Ivory Coast merger, there was virtually none done for the 1 million people that came in from the Ivory Coast. And that's really shameful on us. We've really botched some mergers over the years. And when you botch a merger, it shouldn't be surprised that things don't. So it shouldn't be a surprise that things don't go smoothly in the future. So I don't know if we have any more mergers in our future, but if we do, I certainly hope we take better care than we did last time. All right. So that's it for Methodist News. Don't forget, if you have any questions about the Bible study readings, the Bible story readings, feel free to email them to me. You can always put questions in the comments when you want to. And I think that's pretty much it. Don't forget, you can always go back and rewatch, or if you missed something, you can go back and watch it again. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll go ahead and here's everybody participating this evening. Glad to have everybody here. That's not everybody, by the way. We've got more people than that. They just didn't all say hi. And that's fine. Lots of people like to maintain their privacy. All right, so looks like I don't have anything coming in to any questions coming in the comments or prayer requests or anything. So we will meet again next. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We will meet again next week. So let us pray. God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. All right, folks, thanks for joining, and we'll see y'all in the future. If I don't see you in church,